Hi, welcome back to the Rich Fritsky Show, and thanks so much for taking the time out to be with. Today is part one of the Boston years, but in truth, a previous post, Ghosts of Boston Common, was the true beginning. So have a listen to it if you can. I was all Boston from late August of 1972 through late November of 1975. That's 3 years and 3 months. I arrived there for the very first time at around 10 a.m. on a late August Thursday morning, with roughly 3 hours to kill before my interview. As fate would have it, I met a Tom Halley while waiting in a reception area outside the mayor's office on the 5th floor of Boston's spectacular government center. He was to be interviewed as well. I had gotten there by way of Seton Hall University and one friend, Ira Jackson. And Tom, well, he got there by way of Williams College and one George Steinbrenner. The infamous, the famous George Steinbrenner, the owner of my own New York Yankees. He had also owned a company called the Cleveland Shipbuilding Company, and so he was well familiar with Tom's dad, Lee, who was long the law director of Cleveland and for quite a period of time acting mayor of Cleveland. He also, George Steinbrenner, just happened to be the roommate of Kevin Hagan White, the mayor of Boston, when they were both at Williams College. We were ushered in together by a Leslie Dennis, a friend-to-be, across one of the most spacious and prodigious of hallways imaginable, into a study or lounge behind the mayor's private office. In deference to his schedule, we were suddenly to be interviewed together in what was a magnificent room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking sprawling wonders of American history. We sat on a leather couch, and to my right was the 1885 Common at Twilight painting by Childe Hassam, on loan from the Boston Museum of Fine Arts, a painting that I had back in a 5th grade art class. This is the truth. A painting that I had back then identified as my favorite of favorites. And Washington and the dollar bill, well, there hung the original Gilbert Stuart portrait of the same. I had never walked in such high country before. Kevin Hagan White walked in that room looking every inch a commander. And there was raw power and strength in his voice, and an intensity about him that I immediately liked. He was Irish to the bone, and he came on the quick step, signaling to me that this deal had already been cut, and that this was a pro forma exercise. In rapid succession, he asked the simple questions: where from, age, family, college, studies, political involvement, primary concerns, and pointedly to me, can you actually write? What made it forever memorable, however, was his pausing several times to again and again ask Tom, "Are you really 22? Are you really 22?" And his repeated, "Good God, you look like you're 12. Good God, you look like you're 12. That was the gospel truth, by the way. Tom and I are both 70 now. But I bear the lines of every single day and then some on my face. I have grown old, but Tom, hell, still boyish and not a day over 45, I am sure. My first apartment, by no means perfect, was perfectly situated. 34 Commonwealth Avenue in Back Bay, just off Beacon Hill, but a half block from the peace and beauty of the public garden onto Boston Common, and then just a block onto Government Center and City Hall. If you've ever been to Boston and been to the heart of that city, you know how precious that territory is. It was paradise for a history guy like me, and it came with the bonus of having Tom, who would be my touchstone of a friend in that land, but a block away. Past meeting houses of the Sons of Liberty I'd walk, past the 54th Massachusetts Monument, past William Lloyd Garrison and the old Park Street Church and the rage of the abolitionists, past the old King's Chapel and the Winthrops and Braddocks, past the graves of Paul Revere, his family, Benjamin Franklin's family, and hundreds who toiled to build a colony and to send King George packing. They all kept company with me on my walks to work, and, for that matter, my walks back home to 34 Commonwealth in the evening. They were perfect in every season, come snow or come shine. After 2 years, I moved, and it was a move I came to regret, to a much larger and renovated brownstone at 120 London Street in East Boston. The great loss was the wonder of my walk to work, but I replaced it with the shortest of commutes, a 2-minute walk and but 1 minute on the Blue Line, one stop under the harbor straight to Government Center. Largely Italian and settled, and wary of non-Italian white men who wore jackets and ties, it would inevitably lead to my beatdown at the hands of a young East Boston mob who, unbeknownst to me, waited for me with bats and clubs in hand, as the fury over forced busing to achieve racial integration raged. Unconscious and beaten to a pulp, I was laid in a dumpster behind a bar. So much for memories of East Boston, which somehow always seemed to begin and end right here. I was in the end, however, forever proud of having been deemed worthy of their bigoted vitriol and hate. I liked the side that I was on. My job, which was reasonably demanding, rendered me responsible for all written communication and correspondence of the mayor, incoming, outgoing. It required me to intersect with all departments, all agencies, all little city halls, and all staff. Notably, both those who cooperated with me and those I had to learn to circumvent. I also wrote speeches, and I attended every meeting of the Boston City Council, immediately communicating what occurred there with all staff. My sarcasm often got a bit too biting and personal, and I often had to be curbed, as they indeed grew tough to take. Of the dead, nothing but good, it is written, but they were a collection of the out-of-touch, the outright racist, the pure pals who were always looking to cut a deal, and one honest and completely honorable soul, Larry DeCara. In one raucous session where so many were demagoguing on busing, he sent a note over to me that read, "We are all mad, and this is beyond sad. If the people only knew, they ought to be rioting in the streets." Race and largely anti-busing correspondence dominated, for which I had standard and well-prepared stock responses. But letters rolled in daily from other corridors of power and governance, from federal and state policymakers, from citizens who worried about anything and everything from their school, a park, public housing, transit, healthcare, construction permits, licenses, etc., etc. We responded to all, and I had to daily determine what few the mayor must see. Aware of the mayor's position, I once prematurely responded to a written tirade from the chairman of the Boston Port Authority, drawing the mayor into a premature and public battle over the scope and scale of a development project that he had hoped to publicly avoid. The volume and depth of his repeated "Are you crazies?" shook those prodigious halls as never before, and reportedly, and this is true, reverberated on as many as 3 floors. I had always been summoned to him if there was an issue, and this was indeed the only time he ever, in all outrage, felt compelled to loudly scream, face red and flush, head nigh on exploding, "Are you crazy?" I sat appropriately mute and took it all in, for I had indeed mightily misjudged. To my credit, this was my only true, full-on failing in 3 years and 3 months. And to his credit, he was kind enough to laugh about it in my company and so ease the pain the next day. Fortunately, he had turned his ire to the chairman's picking a street fight and away from me, the guy who fueled the fire. He said, and I'll never forget this, not only is he a son of a bitch, but everyone who works for him is a son of a bitch. And he did what only a son of a bitch does. But everyone else joyfully greeted me with "Are you crazy?" for months on end to come. The D Street Housing Project in South Boston, it's a poor Irish community of many thousands, encompassed some 7 city blocks. It was racking up daily headlines in the papers in June of 1973. Murders, rapes, missing children, stark failures in the social safety net, you name it. It was a universe from which hope had been exiled, and my friends and I brought a half-baked scheme to Ira and Larry, the man who could get things done, who brought it to the mayor, and bang! Any and all resources the city could possibly expend were to be directed or redirected to D Street. And we who proposed it were shipped to an empty apartment or command center at D Street to pull all the pieces together and fulfill the goals. It was the great D Street immersion of the summer of '73. We spent a week there as personnel from public facilities repaired and repainted the archways to every door, to every entrance, and Parks and Recreation put life and grass and fresh flowers and plants back into mini parks that had long been fields of dirt and debris. Basketball courts and hockey rinks were renovated, and new swings and slides installed. The fire department fixed or replaced deficient alarms. The housing department made plumbing and electrical repairs as needed, and fully 1,000 summer jobs were being made available to D Street youth. Jobs counselors were on hand all week to meet with them on site. And there was so much more. It ended with a massive Boston Celebrates D Street barbecue and a summer extravaganza with the great Irish Rovers on its stage, culminating in fireworks. It was one hell of an ending. All week I had noticed this adorable little red-headed girl from one of the nearby apartments. Sheepishly, she had been looking at us all week, never saying a word. My great reward, one of my greatest rewards ever, was her slipping her little hand into mine as the Irish Rovers played and thousands smiled and enjoyed, and maybe, just maybe, at least for a moment in time, looked to hope and possibility again that night. We had actually done something tangible. All in all, the mail received back then, in the years immediately preceding forced busing to achieve racial integration, and then throughout its implementation, was dominated by the issue of race, by fear and misunderstanding, and all too often with the ignorance of a holier-than-thou, we whites are God's chosen people monstrosity of a bigotry and racism that ran so deep. Now, some 50 years removed, as black lives finally ascend, my friends, be, as I have heard Cornel West advise, aware of and prepared for that racist backlash that will most assuredly come from those whose hate has been nurtured and watered by generation unto generation. Vigilance, constant vigilance. In a moment I'll never forget, in the midst of the forced busing crisis itself, back then in early '74, the mayor invited all leaders from the black community in for a meeting of the minds, and there they were in a crowded, overflowing meeting room. The only space unoccupied, a rolling desk chair provided for the mayor. There was to be no dais, no pomp, no separation, just a roll-up-the-sleeves conversation about all their concerns. But there was a bit of stupid with that chair, because this was Kevin Hagan White, who always rushed in a room like a shot out of a cannon, a ball of fire. And so in the very midst of his apologizing for keeping them waiting a bit, he hit that chair so hard that it tumbled over backwards with force, and he frighteningly head over heels with it. Springing back up, he quickly and loudly said, "As you can see, I'm already falling over backwards for you." Great laugh. Oh, did that man have a way of reducing tensions. This is an unfinished tome, with many more brief but epic or tall tales to come next week. Worth coming back for, I think. I certainly hope. Can't do this kind of thing, by the way, this looking 45 plus odd years back in time, without growing nostalgic, wistful, emotional, without wondering what became of oh so many good souls, without wondering about the paths people take, even the one that I took, that had the saving grace of bringing me to Maggie, without hoping that life honored all those I knew and worked with back then, honored them all, and the goodness and the grace that I knew and that had once upon a time been extended to me. Thanks for taking the time out to be with me again. Have a great week. I look forward to the next time. Smile whenever you can and make this troubled world a better place. Yes, they'll see the smile under the mask. They'll see it in your eyes. Take care.